The night sky over Israel erupted in fire and light, a massive, coordinated assault by Iran. What began as a tense evening quickly transformed into a scene of chaos and fear, as the horizon was suddenly illuminated by the relentless barrage of missiles and drones. The sheer intensity of the attack was unlike anything the region had witnessed in decades, with the darkness repeatedly shattered by explosions and the streaks of incoming projectiles. Hundreds of missiles and explosive drones were launched in carefully timed waves, each one designed to maximize confusion and destruction. Swarms of drones buzzed through the night sky, their numbers so great that radar screens lit up with countless blips, overwhelming even the most advanced tracking systems. The attack was not just a show of force, but a calculated attempt to break through Israel's multi-layered defenses by sheer volume and persistence. Sirens wailed across the country, their piercing sound echoing through cities and towns, sending millions scrambling for shelter. Families rushed to underground bunkers, clutching loved ones and whatever belongings they could carry. In those tense moments, the entire nation held its breath, uncertain of what the next minute would bring. The fear was palpable, as parents tried to comfort their children while the world above shook with the force of explosions. Over 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles were confirmed to have been launched in this unprecedented assault, a scale never seen before in the history of the conflict. Military officials described the attack as a game changer, with the sheer quantity and variety of weapons pushing Israel's defense systems to their absolute limits. The numbers alone tell a story of escalation and intent, signaling a new chapter in regional hostilities. Iran's strategy was clear: saturate and confuse Israel's air defense network, testing every layer from the renowned Iron Dome to the advanced Arrow system. Each wave of missiles and drones was meant to probe for weaknesses, to find cracks in the shield that has long protected Israeli cities. The defenders worked tirelessly, launching interceptors and tracking threats in real time, knowing that even a single missile slipping through could have devastating consequences. Israeli jets scrambled from their bases, roaring into the night sky to intercept threats and defend the homeland. Interceptor missiles streaked upward, colliding with incoming projectiles in midair, creating fiery explosions that lit up the city skylines. It was a deadly ballet above the cities, a high-stakes contest of technology, training, and sheer willpower, with the fate of millions hanging in the balance. Despite a remarkably high interception rate, the attack forced Tel Aviv into lockdown. Airports were closed, flights grounded, and the usually bustling streets emptied as people sought safety indoors. The city, known for its vibrant nightlife and energy, became eerily silent, a stark reminder of the vulnerability that even the most advanced defenses cannot fully erase. The psychological impact was immense. The sense of security that many Israelis had come to rely on was suddenly and violently shattered. In bomb shelters and living rooms, people clung to each other, watching news updates with anxious eyes. The fear and uncertainty rippled through every community, leaving emotional scars that would linger long after the last siren faded. This was not just a military challenge, but a direct threat to Israel's way of life. Homes were damaged, neighborhoods disrupted, and the routines of daily life upended. For many, the attack was a stark reminder that conflict can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. The crisis had begun, and its consequences were only starting to unfold. As emergency services rushed to respond and the world watched in shock, it became clear that this attack would have far-reaching implications, not just for Israel, but for the entire region. The scale of the assault marked a turning point, setting the stage for what could become a prolonged and dangerous escalation. In a remarkable display of technological prowess and international cooperation, Israel's air defense system recently achieved a near-perfect 99% interception rate against a massive barrage of incoming threats. This extraordinary feat was made possible not only by the advanced Iron Dome system, but also through the critical support of allies like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Jordan, who provided intelligence, logistical aid, and even direct military assistance. The world watched as interceptors lit up the night sky, a testament to the effectiveness of Israel's layered defense network. However, this impressive victory came at a staggering financial cost. Each Iron Dome interceptor missile carries a price tag of tens of thousands to millions of dollars, and the sheer volume of launches required to counter the attack rapidly depleted Israel's stockpile. Behind the scenes, military officials and government leaders now face urgent budget meetings, grappling with the economic strain of sustaining such a high-intensity defense. In stark contrast, Iran's strategy relies on overwhelming Israel with waves of cheap drones and ballistic missiles. These weapons are produced at a fraction of the cost of Israel's interceptors, creating a dangerous economic imbalance. For every expensive missile Israel fires, Iran can launch many more low-cost threats, forcing Israel into a costly war of attrition. Israel's supply of interceptors is not unlimited. Manufacturing replacements is a slow and complex process, involving specialized components and skilled labor. As empty racks begin to appear in storage facilities, the pressure mounts on Israel's defense industry to ramp up production, but time is not on their side. Meanwhile, Iran's missile stockpiles remain vast and largely untouched. Intelligence reports suggest that thousands more missiles are ready for launch, stored in hidden warehouses and mobile launchers across the region. This growing arsenal poses a persistent and escalating threat to Israeli security. Faced with these realities, Israeli military planners are now confronted with agonizing decisions. If the attacks continue, which cities and critical infrastructure should be prioritized for protection? Every choice carries life or death consequences, and the margin for error is razor thin. Iran's strategy may not be to destroy Israel outright, but to exhaust its defenses, drain its resources, and undermine public confidence. By launching relentless barrages, Iran hopes to overwhelm the Iron Dome and force Israel into a defensive posture, both militarily and psychologically. For ordinary Israelis, the Iron Dome has long been a symbol of safety and reassurance, but as the strain on the system grows, so too does public anxiety. Families shelter in their homes, watching the skies and wondering if the next attack will break through. The psychological comfort once provided by the Iron Dome is now under unprecedented pressure. Israel cannot afford to absorb endless attacks without consequence. The mounting pressure is fueling calls for a more aggressive response, both from military leaders and a public increasingly concerned about their safety. The government faces a critical decision: continue playing defense or escalate to deter future attacks. The conflict has become a numbers game, with each side testing the limits of the other's endurance. As Israel weighs its options, one thing is clear: the old strategies may no longer be enough. A new approach is urgently needed to address this evolving and relentless threat. As tensions in the Middle East reached a boiling point, the world watched in disbelief as the United States made a fateful decision. In a dramatic escalation, U.S. forces launched a series of coordinated airstrikes targeting Iran's most critical nuclear facilities. The night sky over Iran was lit up by the thunder of missiles and the glow of explosions as American bombers struck with precision. Satellite images soon revealed the aftermath: smoldering craters and devastated infrastructure at sites long shrouded in secrecy. In a somber televised address, President Trump informed the nation and the world of the strikes on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, facilities at the very core of Iran's nuclear ambitions. He declared that the action was not taken lightly, but was necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, a move he argued was vital for global security. The president's words echoed across news networks as the world tried to process the gravity of the moment. The operation was spearheaded by B-2 stealth bombers, which penetrated deep into Iranian airspace. These advanced aircraft released powerful bunker-busting bombs, designed to destroy even the most heavily fortified underground facilities. The strikes were swift, calculated, and devastating, aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear program in a single, decisive blow. This marked a radical escalation in the conflict. For years, the U.S. had relied on sanctions and diplomacy, but now it had shifted from a defensive posture to direct military offense. Inside the Pentagon, officials monitored the operation with tense anticipation, aware that the world was now entering uncharted territory. Across U.S. bases in the Middle East, soldiers were placed on the highest alert. Military vehicles mobilized under the cover of darkness, and defensive positions were reinforced. The expectation was clear: Iran would not let this attack go unanswered, and American forces braced for imminent retaliation. In Israel, the mood was a mix of relief and deep anxiety. While some saw the U.S. action as a necessary step to neutralize a looming threat, others feared that the conflict had now become truly global, with Israel at its epicenter. Sirens wailed in Tel Aviv, and families gathered around televisions, uncertain of what the next hours would bring. The international response was immediate and intense. Russia and China swiftly condemned the U.S. strikes, warning of dire consequences and calling for restraint. European leaders, caught off guard, expressed grave concern, warning that the last hopes for diplomacy had been shattered. Newsrooms around the world scrambled to keep up with the rapidly unfolding crisis. With missiles flying and diplomatic channels closing, the prospect of negotiation seemed all but lost. The US action had slammed the door on talks, raising the specter of a much larger and more destructive war in the region. In capitals across the globe, allies and adversaries alike scrambled to assess the fallout. Emergency meetings were convened, intelligence agencies worked overtime, and analysts tried to predict what might come next. In Iran, the response was swift and resolute. Soldiers mobilized, military units prepared for combat, and the streets of Tehran saw a surge in security. Civilians, fearing further attacks, sought shelter as the nation steeled itself for what was to come. Across the region, uncertainty reigned. City streets were tense and quiet, crowds gathered around news screens, and border crossings were placed under strict watch. The sense of foreboding was palpable. No one knew what the next day would bring. The stakes had never been higher. World leaders huddled in crisis meetings, military commanders issued urgent briefings, and global markets reacted with wild volatility. The world was on edge, aware that the decisions made in these critical hours could shape the future for years to come. As night fell, a tense silence settled over cities around the globe. The United Nations stood illuminated but powerless, and people everywhere watched and waited. The world held its breath, knowing that history was being written in real time. The U.S. airstrikes ignited fierce debate in Washington. Republicans praised the action as bold and necessary. Democrats condemned it as reckless and unconstitutional. The public was deeply divided, with heated arguments over war powers and the wisdom of escalation. This political split sent mixed signals to the world, revealing a fractured America at a moment of crisis. The lack of unity raised doubts about America's resolve and the future of its foreign policy. Iran responded to the U.S. strikes with defiance, vowing to rebuild its nuclear program stronger than ever. At the UN, Iran accused the U.S. of war and promised retaliation. The attack shattered any hope for diplomacy. Tehran declared talks with America dead. Iran activated its network of proxies, threatening a multi-front war across the region. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and militias in Iraq and Syria were put on alert. European mediators watched helplessly as the situation spiraled out of control. The region was now locked into a cycle of force and retaliation, with no room for compromise. The hope for a peaceful settlement faded, replaced by the grim reality of open war. Beneath the headlines, civilians in Israel and Iran are paying the highest price. Hundreds have been killed, thousands wounded, and daily life has been upended by fear and loss. In Israel, missile fragments strike homes. In Iran, airstrikes devastate communities near military sites. The psychological toll is immense. Families live in constant fear, children grow up in the shadow of war. Economic hardship and shortages add to the suffering, especially in Iran. The personal stories of loss are drowned out by the noise of war. Civilians are trapped in a conflict they did not choose and cannot escape. Their suffering is the true cost of this escalating crisis. The conflict now threatens to engulf the entire Middle East. Iran's proxies are on alert, and a single spark could ignite a regional war. The UN pleads for restraint, but the cycle of attack and retaliation continues. US involvement has raised the stakes. Any Iranian response could trigger a devastating escalation. Arab states fear being drawn into the conflict, while global shipping and oil supplies are at risk. The region is a powder keg, with alliances tested and nerves frayed. The threat of a wider war is no longer distant, it's immediate and terrifying. The war's economic impact is global and immediate. Oil prices have soared as Iran threatens the Strait of Hormuz, fueling fears of an energy crisis. Stock markets tumble, airlines reroute, and shipping costs skyrocket. Israel's economy is disrupted. Iran's, already battered by sanctions, faces collapse. The cost of war diverts resources from essential services, deepening hardship. A prolonged conflict could trigger a global recession, hitting the world's poorest hardest. The economic shockwaves prove that no nation is immune from this war. The region stands at a crossroads, with diplomacy shattered and war escalating. Iran, Israel, and the US are locked in a cycle of retaliation, with little room for compromise. The risk of full-scale war is terrifyingly real, and the world watches anxiously. Lasting peace seems distant. The choices made now will shape generations. The international community is divided and powerless to stop the slide. The hope for peace is fragile. easily extinguished by the next missile or airstrike. The path ahead is perilous. Only wisdom and restraint can prevent catastrophe.